Alright, today we're going to look at the Dura Ace C24 wheel set from Shimano. These are a few years old and pretty much an out-of-date rim profile. They're 21mm wide and 21mm deep, so by today's standards that's way too narrow. They're relatively heavy as well for their rim profile, 640 grams for the front and 850 for the rear wheel, which in the grand scheme of things isn't ridiculously heavy, but for the top of the range Shimano Dura Ace wheel with that rim profile, yeah, it's out of date. However, I think it's still worth having a really close look at them to see how they've been made, how they're put together, because Shimano have done a lot of clever things with this, and it should give you an insight into the engineering standards they use. And also the hubs themselves are used across the Dura Ace range, so if we look at how the hubs go together, that can help you evaluate other Dura Ace wheels as well. Today is a very special review because we have gained backstage access to the inner workings of the rim and spoke interface. How have we done this? Well, one of my mates went out with his Dura Ace C24 wheels and managed to wreck his front wheel so badly that the spoke tore out of the carbon laminate area, completely revealing the inner workings, which we are going to have a good close look at now. So he's donated it to medical science, as it were. So we're going to do a full-on autopsy on this wheel, all right? So let's get into it. All right, let's go into a bit more detail then. This is the front wheel, so let's do that first. It uses an aluminium rim with a carbon laminate on it. We'll get into more detail about how that actually goes together when we analyse the busted one in a while. The hub itself is aluminium with a fairly traditional cup and ball open bearing system, which again we'll analyse later in detail. As we said at the start of the video, the rim is 21mm wide and actually 20mm deep, so it's square basically. It has a flat profile between each spoke. Inside the rim, there's no spoke holes because the spoke system is proprietary, which we will have a look at later. Subjective stuff then, that sort of doesn't mean anything, but all the reviewers seem to say. These wheels are pretty smooth riding when you ride them. The braking is really good if you use Dura Ace brakes with Dura Ace brake pads, really strong braking. I've ridden these wheels quite a bit and I've given them a bit of a kicking. Nothing's happened to them. Even when they have needed truing, they've not been out by a long way. They've never lost any radial true. It's only been lateral true. The spokes they use seem to be very strong. I've never seen a spoke break on anyone's Dura Ace wheel actually. The width of the front hub is pretty good. It's not as wide as an expensive fancy boutique hub, but it's pretty good. Spokes then. Now the front wheel uses 16 spokes and the rear uses 20. The rear wheel uses 10 on the drive side and 10 on the non-drive side. Front uses 8 and 8. Now that doesn't really seem like many spokes because it's not. However, these wheels are very strong, and I think the reason they are strong is because the spoke system is completely proprietary and therefore is optimum for the structure. Now in designing these, Shimano have gone for an entire wheel system rather than just designing the hub, the spokes and then the rim as separate things like you would get if you buy a hub from one company, spokes from another company and a rim from another company. These things are designed to work as a unit, so they've really gone in on the design. Which is admirable. The rear wheel then uses a pretty non-exciting sounding free body, which isn't gonna excite anyone like a sort of hollow sounding Chris King wheel or an extra light or a tune or something like that. But I found that in use, when you combine it with Shimano gears, this thing is very solid. There's no clicking, cracking, popping. There's no sort of hollow rasping noise when you're pedaling around. It just feels like a really well put together engine. I liken the top end Shimano stuff to the Toyota of cycling really. Just keeps going. You don't really ever need to service these hubs much compared to a boutique hub. I think probably most people who buy these wheels would just never service them and just ride them forever. And the fact they can do that is testament to the engineering that's gone into them. Really good. But yeah, the width of the rim is not modern, and the depth of course is not modern, and the weight for the width of the rim you get is not going to excite anyone nowadays. So I think that these wheels are pretty much out of date. I'd love to see Shimano make an update version of these with perhaps a 25mm wide rim profile, make the rim a little bit more aero shaped, but keep that proprietary spoke and hub system, which would be really cool. All right, so here is the dead rim. Looks pretty savage, I think you can agree. What's happened is something's hit here, or something's bashed the spoke with such force and with such leverage that it's yanked the spoke nipple system out of the rim through the carbon laminate, which is the thing that holds it all together, ripped it to shreds. The spoke itself was in pretty bad condition with a kink in the middle of it. This has thrown the wheel completely out of true. This rim is just fucked, basically, which is grim, and I feel very sorry for it and very sorry for the guy it happened to. However, it does give us a unique opportunity to get right inside it and see exactly how it works. So from a purely scientific point of view, this is exciting stuff. Gory though, eh? Look at that. Alright, so here we have a complete proprietary Dura Ace C24 spoke system. This end sits in the rim. Here we have a brass cup washer which sits in the top of the nipple screw-in system. Here we have the piece that sits through the hole in the aluminium of the rim, and then this face here sits onto the surface of the aluminium rim, and then the carbon laminate sits on top of that with a hole in it, of course, for the nipple system to go through. At the other end, this part sits in the hub shell. Let's look at each part in detail. So starting from the rim side then, this is a standard straight pull spoke head. Now this interesting piece forms half of the nipple system in the rim. You'll notice this piece is angled over to one side because each nipple system is either for the left side of the rim or the right side of the rim. Now, whichever side it's supposed to be for, it will be further to that side, which means that this side has to be angled further down than the other side. It's threaded inside, and this is held onto the rim with the carbon laminate. Next up, we have the second part of the nipple system. This thread goes into here. There's a concaved face here, which this part sits in, and then this part sits on the head of the spoke. Screwed together, it looks like this, and will sit in place like this. This end of the spoke is threaded, and a small metal piece is screwed onto it. Now this piece butts up against the shoulder, which is machined into the hub shell, which I'll show you later, and this is effectively another spoke head. So one spoke head is machined onto the spoke itself, the other spoke head has to be screwed on. Now the way this spoke system works is slightly different to a normal regular spoke system. Now this end has an effective spoke head on it, and this end has a spoke head on it. Now to add tension to the spoke system, you screw this part in, which effectively reduces the length of the spoke by pulling the whole spoke system further through into this hole here. The spoke itself resembles a slightly stronger, thicker version of a Sapim CX Ray spoke. It's aero-bladed in the middle and round at each end. Now this is the piece of carbon laminate that got ripped off in that incident. You can see part of the Dura Ace logo on the side. Now there's a hole in the top where the spoke system goes through. Inside you can see the depression where this part goes. Then the spoke will come in from the other side and screw in there. In terms of the weave then, you can see they've gone diagonally like this and then diagonally like that. Now I'm not entirely sure how they do this, but I suspect they wrap around the entire wheel and then cut off the excess, leaving this surface on, and then obviously that's bonded very strongly onto the metal of the rim. Right, next up is the axle then. This is a standard locating and non-locating bearing arrangement system. This side is non-adjustable and sits into the bearings, which are open cup and ball inside the hub shell. This side, this part here can screw in or out, so that's the preload adjustment. This plastic part is a very clever system. It slides on to this spline here. Now this spline also acts as the gripping part of the preload system, so you can screw it in easily. This plastic part has a matching spline inside it, which is actually twice the pitch of this spline here, so you can micro adjust it pretty well. This slides on to this part here and locks the system in place when you lock this outer lock nut down on the outside. Now this plastic system sits slightly away from the face of this preload system. So when you tighten this down, that prevents this coming under any extra force from this side, meaning you can get really accurate and really smooth and consistent bearing preload without it being affected by how much you tighten this part down or by how much you clamp your QR lever in, which is, I think, an excellent system and pretty much genius. However, the trade-off is it is quite a bit heavier than just a smooth axle that goes all the way through without any of this clever anti-compression system here. On this side, you can see a seal which stops rubbish getting into the bearing system, and this part also acts as the seal as well as part of the locking system. Opening the axle up, then you can see this is the preload lockdown system. This is the outer locking system with a washer on it. Here you can see the spline that's cut into this plastic compression unit, which acts as a seal and also a locking part of the locking system. Here's the thread which the preload goes onto. Now have a look here. You can see this side has been cut flat, and also in here is flat. So when you screw this on to the thread here and you put this on here, you need to match up this flat edge to this here, and then that acts as that acts to lock everything together and prevent this from opening or closing as well. It's almost like a kind of a Chinese finger trap. It's really clever. I mean, everything kind of locks everything else in place. It's brilliant. But again, it's not particularly light. Taking a closer look inside the hub then, here's the flange. You can see the spokes are spaced pretty close together here, creating a fairly sharp angle out and up to the rim. Here are the bearings. These are just open cup and ball bearings that sit into a cup machined into the body of the hub shell. Now I've got a theory that not only does this allow for really decent bearing preload, it also makes things probably a lot cheaper to produce, because Shimano doesn't have to worry too much about getting things super accurate like you would do with a cartridge bearing, which requires very close tolerances in the machining process. So they can cut things fairly loosely into the hub shell and then dial out any inaccuracies with their proprietary preload system. I also think they've probably got a ball bearing machine in Shimano HQ, which churns out millions and millions of ball bearings every year, so that cuts costs. Pretty clever, very effective, and I don't see any reason to use a cartridge bearing over this kind of system if you do it properly, like these guys have. Now here you can see how the spoke goes through with this screw-on end piece. Now this is going through the hole in the hub shell. If we pull it down into position, you can see how it butts up against the shoulder, which is machined inside the hub shell. Now obviously you can't see that, but it's there. I'm pulling as hard as I can and it's not coming through. So that's how the spoke is held in position on the hub shell. At the other end, it's got that proprietary nipple system, which sits underneath the carbon laminate, but on top of the aluminium rim, holding it in place until such time as something yanks it out with such force that it rips the carbon laminate off. Yeah, that's how it works. You'll notice that the thread on this spoke is actually about half the length of a standard spoke thread. If push comes to shove, and you break one of your Shimano spokes and you're not anywhere near a Shimano dealer, I think there's a chance that you could sort of make your own by hacksawing the thread halfway off the end of a Sapim CX Ray spoke, which is the right length to start with, and then using that in the system. It would be a bit of a wrestle to get it all in there, but you could do it. Now here you can see how the spoke nipple system sits on to the aluminium rim surface and where the carbon laminate should be sitting over the top of it. Now if you compare it to one that's not completely wrecked, you can see how the shape of the spoke system could be seen from underneath the carbon. That's what it looks like when it's ripped off. You can see the angle they've laid the carbon down in as well, which is kind of diagonally across, like a diagonal crisscross pattern. So the way the axle sits through is it comes through from this side. That's the locating bearing side there. Then the preload adjuster screws on. And it only has to just touch the bearings inside before that system is perfectly balanced and smooth. You don't need to go really hard on it because that puts grit into the system. You just need to do it till it just about touches. Next is this part. There you go. And finally the end part screws on and you just tighten it up. Also interesting is how hard this carbon actually is. Now this is extremely thin and sharp carbon, which forms the laminate on the rim. Now I'm going to squeeze it pretty hard, but just watch how it doesn't move. And you can see my fingers going white. That's me going as hard as I can. and it's not splitting, opening it this way as well, yeah, that's not even moving, really. It's really strong. So, you know, amazing that you can have such a thin material that can withstand such force. Obviously, it does have a limit though, because this is ripped off. But, you know, you see my point. So yeah, pretty interesting system then. So there we go then, Shimano Dura Ace C24 wheels. Rims are out of date by today's standards, but I think definitely really interesting bit of engineering, focusing on the entire wheel system rather than just individual parts that fit together to a standard. Yeah, really good.